All right, good. So I hope I know the test was probably hard to study for. I hope it was okay in terms of your experience. This concludes and makes us be finished with the muscles and with the bones. And now we move to the other systems. The first system we're going to talk about is the cardiovascular system. And we're going to start with the heart anatomy. The heart is also known as the core, COR. So whenever you see core, COR, you know it's heart stuff. It is positioned between the back column, the vertebral column in the back, and the breastbone, the sternum in the front. So it's like between there, in between. You know that, right? And then on the outside, laterally, it's outlined by the lungs. And so it sits there in between the lungs, nicely cushioned. And in the front is the breastplate, which is taken away. And in the back, we have the vertebral column. On the inferior side, below here, we have the diaphragm. And the diaphragm separates the thoracic cavity with the abdominal pelvic cavity below there. The apex of the heart, if you look at the heart, it's kind of weird, but you can kind of see that there's a little more base here, a little more bottom here, and it tips down slightly. So it's sort of a little bit like a diagonally inverted triangle. And the bottom part here is known as the apex, and the top here is known as the base. On top, superiorly, we have the great vessels that come down and sort of anchor the heart from above down, hold it in place there. That's the aorta and the pulmonary vessels. When we look at the protection of the heart, there's a very interesting system. We have a serous membrane system that protects the heart, but it also protects the lungs, and it also actually goes around the gut, which looks a little weird down there, a little different, but we'll talk about that when we get there. So it is actually a system that has two membranes, but it's not really two membranes, it's like one continuous membrane. So what you do in terms of visualizing what is going on here, you take a balloon and you take a fist and you put the fist into the balloon. And when you push that down, you have a membrane, a balloon part that's right around the fist, and you have one that's right around the cavity wall, wherever that is. In the heart, it's around here, the outside is that part, and then in the right on the heart is a membrane, and that sits on the heart, that's the inner membrane. So you have like two membranes. So if you take a cut right here, it looks like you cut through right here. It looks like you have two membranes, an inner one and an outer one. But when you actually look at the system, you see that these membranes are connected up here. So that's like the balloon. There is actually one balloon that looks like it's two membranes. And this is a really kind of cool construction, because what happens with that is you can have a fluid in between those membranes, and actually that's known as the serous fluid. And what you can do then is you can have that fist on the inside move around, but with the fluid it moves around and is protected by the fluid, and it doesn't rub against the other wall. And so it becomes a friction reducing situation. And of course, it also is a protecting situation where it sort of everything has a double membrane and it protects it from everything coming in except that one place on top. And so that's very helpful as well. You see the lungs here, it's in the midline here. And so we need to call this serous system something specific. And in the heart, it's known as the pericardium. Peri means around, cardio means heart, so it's the thing that's around the heart. And in the lungs, it's the pleura. It's known as the pleura. We'll get to that. And then when we look at the different membranes, the one that lines right on the heart, right on the organ itself, that's known as the visceral layer. There is visceral. And then we have one layer that lines on the outside, on the chest wall here, and that's the parietal layer. So in the heart, actually, what we have is we have a visceral pericardium and we have a parietal pericardium. Okay? I know, that's the serous system of protection, of membrane protection membranes. So let's move and from there and go through from the outside inward to the heart inside, so we can kind of layer what makes up the layers of the heart. On the outside is a pericardial sac. That's a bag that is the heart is sitting in. The outer layer of this bag is a fibrous part, and that's anchoring the heart into its surroundings. And then we also have an inner part, and that's a parietal layer of the pericardium, and that becomes the parietal part, the outer part of that serous membrane system. And then you see here how it folds over and it lines onto the heart, and then that becomes the epicardium, which is contiguous with the visceral pericardium, the visceral layer of the pericardium. And then in between is the pericardial cavity, and that's the serous membrane cavity that has fluid in it. And then we have the myocardium right here underneath. That's the muscle part. And deeper on the inside, we have another layer of epithelial tissue. And these are actually these layers are, a lot of it is epithelial tissue. And underneath, deeper to the myocardium, we have the endocardium. And then underneath there, we have heart chambers. And those are the ones that the blood goes in and out of. Oh, here, look at that. The myocardium is the muscle, the heart muscle, that pumps, that contracts. Then the endocardium lines the chambers. And that layer here, the endocardium, is contiguous with an endothelium that lines the tubes, the blood vessel tubes. Cool. The heart is an interesting thing. It's a pump, and it pumps the blood with a steady flow through 4 chambers and through a closed system of elastic pipes. So when we look at the term, you've heard the term arteries and veins before, right? When we look at the terms arteries, here they become an important thing. The arteries are vessels that lead blood away from the heart. And then the veins are vessels that return the blood back to the heart. So those are the main 2 vessels, and then we have in between, connecting the 2, we have what's known as capillaries, and we'll talk about those 2 coming up. Those are exchange vessels. They look different. They have to be leaky. Stuff has to go in and out of them when we are in the tissues that need the oxygen, for example, delivered to. And the exchange of the gases is the oxygen, the O2, with the CO2, and that's the carbon dioxide. And look at here, we have. So let's see, we have blood coming in. So when it comes in, those are veins. They bring the blood back to the heart. These are the inferior vena cava and the superior vena cava. They bring the blood into an atrium. That's the right atrium. That's the 4th chamber. We have one on the right, we have one on the left. And then from there, the blood moves into a main chamber. And they know that as a ventricle. And then from there, the blood gets ejected, and when the pump contracts and it squeezes, the blood gets ejected and pushed through these big pipes. These are the arteries. And actually from here, they go to the lungs. And then the lung actually fills up the blood with oxygen, and then the blood goes right back to the heart from there. And it goes into the other side, goes into the left atrium. And that's a 4th chamber. So the blood trickles into there, and then from there it trickles into the bigger chamber, the ventricle, and then that contracts, and then that contracts, it pushes the blood out, and that's the aorta, makes a big arch, and then it goes into the body and feeds the body with blood, with blood that is nicely enriched with oxygen. And then from there it comes back here, through these vena cavas, when it's, depleted of oxygen, through the veins. Yeah, interesting thing. And so we have 4 chambers, and we have blood flowing through 2 different circuits. So the first, from the left side, the blood goes to the lung, and then it comes right back into, from the right side, it goes then to the lungs and comes right back to the left side of the heart. And from there, it goes to the rest of the body. And so the one circuit that goes to the lungs is known as the pulmonary circuit. Whenever you see this word pulmonary things, pulm, then you know it's lung stuff. And the circuit that goes to everything else is known as the systemic circuit. And the atrium is a symbol for that. Those are the receiving chambers. And then the ventricles are known as the ejection chambers, the ones that throw the blood, that pump the blood to the circuits, to the specific circuits. And the right and the left atria are divided by an interatrial septum, and the right and the left ventricle have an interventricular septum that's in between them. So here you have that visualized. This is a pretty good picture of the anatomy. We have a bigger one coming up. And then here you see the two circuits. And so the blue is sort of representing low oxygen, high carbon dioxide, and oxygen is what the cells need to make energy, and carbon dioxide is their byproduct, or their used up products, used up oxygen. And so we're going to get rid of the carbon dioxide. So when it's high here, it goes to the lungs. The lungs, you breathe out the carbon dioxide, and it fills up the oxygen. And here then on the red side, you have the oxygen behind, the carbon dioxide below. So the lungs fill it up with oxygen, the blood delivers the oxygen to the body. Ooh, a little faster. And that brings me to an interesting